Well, I just had an absolutely delightful time with Michael Voris. Again, I'm grateful for Vinny and all the wonderful things he's done once he's come on board. It went so well that I have to put this disclaimer in here. I know my flying monkeys, and they know me. It just was it was a fun thing to do. In no way does it change reality. We still feel very strongly that Rome is the great harlot, the fourth and final beast of Daniel and Revelation. It does beg a deeper, more philosophical question about Revelation 18, I believe it's 18:4, when Jesus Christ says, "Come out of her, my people." And I walked away, obviously my emotions are affecting me because it was a very, very pleasant time, an interview, and he was gracious to spend time with me. Obviously, he hasn't been exposed to any of our material, and hopefully if he gets exposed, he doesn't feel betrayed. It was with all sincerity that we went after him, and I'm putting this interview up exactly as is. There were some powerful personal moments. He shared some very, what I felt were pretty private details that I had not heard before. And I cherish that. So if anything, from my perspective and those of my beloved flying monkeys that share this perspective as a born-again Christian, we just lift the whole thing up in prayer. We lift ourselves up in prayer, and we lift Michael Voris up in prayer. Because I'm absolutely sincere. When I told him that what he does is by divine appointment, I believe that. I absolutely believe that. That doesn't necessarily mean he's where the Lord wants him. He's where the Lord needs him to be. I personally feel that the Lord wants everyone to be, as a Christian, with Christ, born again. But very much so that everyone has a role to play. So I didn't think I needed to do this, but it did go very well, very pleasant. And so I figured I'd start this great interview off with this disclaimer. Enjoy it. All right. Love Skype. All right, Michael, thank you so much. I'm so excited. I am so excited to talk to you. It's pretty humorous because, as my friends and fans know, I'm not. It's not a priority. Ecumenism is not a priority, and yet I am so tickled to talk to you. Really, you are quite a special individual, and so let me go ahead and start with your background. I kind of feel like you were divinely appointed for what you're doing. You didn't just pop up out of nowhere. You have a background and an experience in journalism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. When I graduated from, actually, this is kind of funny. First of all, I appreciate the lauds there. I don't know about the divinely appointed part.
Well, let me address that. There's no one else that does what you do, and there's no one else that has the connections, the network. You fight against the grain. There's some very strong forces out there that would rather not have you do what you do. So, hey, listen, I have no problem with saying that I feel pretty strongly as a Christian that you have a divine appointment. So don't hedge on that. But go ahead and talk about your background. I mean, really, that's the point. You have a background that has led into this. You didn't just pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I always wanted to go to Notre Dame, so I went to Notre Dame out of high school. I was in California at the time, went to Notre Dame, and somehow, doesn't matter, somehow I got wrapped up in the accounting program at Notre Dame, and I hated it. Apologies to all accountants out there, but it wasn't my wheelhouse, wasn't my bailiwick. And I had a, shall we say, a direct priest, or a priest who spoke very directly, who called me in at the beginning of senior year, and through my, I'm sorry, the end of my junior year going into senior year, through my final accounting exam across the desk at me and said, "You do know when the accounting firms come here to campus, they actually do look at your grades. Has anyone ever told you that?"
Meaning what? Your grades were not good enough?
My grades sucked. They were horrible. I hated it. Oh, I couldn't say. I was the guy that every time there was a huge major accounting test coming up, I cleaned my room.
I maintained a 2.5 in college, so trust me, I'm not proud of that either.
It was, anyway, so he said, "Here's the deal. I'll change this F to a D if you get out of the College of Business altogether, not just the accounting program, but all of it." And I said, "Deal."
Oh my
But
goodness.
before I picked up the phone and called my parents, I had to find something else. And the only there's 4 colleges at Notre Dame: science, engineering, business, and arts and letters. And arts and letters usually a big pre-professional, med school and all that sort of stuff. And I said, "Well, I'm business is crossed off. There's no way I'm going into science. Absolutely no way I'm going into engineering. So that leaves the College of Arts and Letters." And at the time, the 53 programs they had in there, the only one that would take all of my business credits and count them as electives and still allow me to graduate on time was communications. So I went into that program, and I was sitting there. I was thinking to myself, where have you been my whole life?
You're proving my point, Michael. You're proving my point. Divine appointment.
I'm thinking to myself in class every single day. Really? I busted my butt in a major I hated, and I could have been here doing this. This is loads of fun. Anyway, I got an internship at the NBC station in South Bend my first semester senior year. So I was actually in the program about 5 minutes, and I just applied for it and got it. And of course, all the other communications majors who'd been in it since the end of freshman year are all ticked off. And I don't know, I don't blame them. I would have been too. And I loved it. I've always loved history. I've always loved news and media and all that sort of thing. So I walk into the NBC station in South Bend, and I go into the control room, and of course, for any guy, any red-blooded American guy, here's this great big huge control room with all kinds of colored buttons and little bars that move up and down and 7,000 monitors on the wall and things flying around. It was like, it was like video games before there were video games. I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I was standing in the control room, and it was just it was lunchtime, so there was the local station used to call that news break or news minute or something like that. And I was in the control room, the producer was in there, and a couple of the tech guys and the director and everything. And through the glass out into the studio, I could see the anchor, the host of the little news brief, that's what it was called. And she was reading the stuff off the prompter, and the guy's sitting here running the prompter beside me, and I'm just standing there looking at all of this and going, there's like a half a dozen people here, and about 200,000 people just heard what came out of her mouth. There's only 5 or 6 people here. Wow, this is really cool. And that was it. I've never lost that. That was about maybe the second week of September 1982, and I have never lost that fascination with that. And so I graduated from Notre Dame. One of my parents' friends was a writer for Walter Cronkite. He got my foot in the door for me at CBS, and I was just like, wow, I love this. This is great. My first day at CBS was the day the Marine compound was blown up in Beirut.
1983, right?
Yep, October 23rd, 1983. That was my very first day. And I was supposed to work 8 hours. I worked almost 20. And obviously the circumstances aren't what I'm talking about, but the activity I loved. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And I got home. My parents had moved when I was at Notre Dame. My parents had moved to Westchester, and I took the Westchester, just north of the city. I took the train up, and I was all, all psyched and everything. And I said, this is so much better than accounting.
Wow. Wow. Your first day was the barracks bombing. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Very first day.
Yeah.
I tell all that we were in the middle of a bit of a hiring spree right now because we've had some really good support and very generous people. And I tell people when you come in here, you have to have a passion for wanting to know. You have to want
Amen.
to know. Every single thing that you don't know should bother you that you don't know it. And if you have that, you'll be great because that's the type of personality that thrives in this kind of environment. And if you don't have that, well, go do something else because this is going to be like accounting was for me for you.
You're talking about journalism. That's a quality that is missing in mainstream journalism. Mainstream journalism is very, very controlled. And if you would connect the dots from CBS to your own independent media outlet, and along the way, it has to do with the powerful influence of your father in bringing you back to Catholicism.
Right. Actually, it was my mother, but my father also.
Okay.
It was both of them, but my
Okay.
mom was the one that kicked the first domino over.
I just remember you recounting the powerful conversation that you had with your dad. That was just kind of the final, coming home for you. But I didn't know about the influence of your mom. Connect the dots for me.
Sure. I went out into TV land, as we call it, affiliate land. I was at CBS for a little over a year. Is that right? Sorry, a little less than a year. At the network, if you're just kind of a little peon like I was, they move you around to different broadcasts. So I went from the national newsroom to CBS Morning News. That was with for some of your older viewers, that will be Bill Curtis and Diane Sawyer days.
Oh yeah.
And I won't waste the time here, but at some point I got a really funny story about Diane Sawyer and me. I thought for sure my very short-lived career was over.
Don't tease me like that. The time is yours. If you can spare the time, I want to hear the story. Come on.
Okay. So they had this the morning news office because every broadcast is like its own division. They share information obviously because you're reporting on the same news, but they've got their own studio, their own work office, all of that stuff. So I got assigned to morning news, and my job was essentially to go in and make sure that desk, the great big huge long like boardroom desk, was all the latest wire copy, because this is back in the day where you have to go rip the paper off the Associated Press machine and the United Press International machine and Reuters. You've got actually like little rolls of paper towel sitting there and they come in and they read them and they mark them down. So I just make sure all of that was in order and always updated. So and nobody was to sit in Bill Curtis's or Diane Sawyer's seat at the table. Nobody. And so it's my very first day. The producer was don't you dare let anybody sit in those chairs. And I was like, okay. So I'm marching in and out at 2 a.m. and replacing all the wire copy and 2:15 and 2:30 and doing my thing. I get in there about, I don't know, it was like maybe 3 or 3:15 or something in the morning. And there's this woman who I don't know sitting in Diane Sawyer's chair. And she was the only one in the place. And I said, excuse me, ma'am. I said, that's Diane Sawyer's chair. You're not allowed to sit there. And she looked up at me, and she looked like it's 3 a.m, so it looks like she's been out on a bender, and which she hadn't, but it looked like that. And her hair's all over the place. She's got these enormous Superfly glasses on, and she looks up at me and she goes, "I am Diane Sawyer." And I'm like, okay, and I am fired. Yes, I kind of walked out of the place.
Awesome.
I said, I'm terribly sorry. And I almost said, I didn't recognize you.
Yeah, right. At 3 a.m. with your big Coke bottle glasses and prior to makeup and everything else, your transformation for the television. I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it's a good.
awesome.
I would not be sitting here having this conversation with you now had I said what I was thinking.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But you know what? It belies something much deeper in what a production that news is. News is an absolute farce.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah, it
entertainment.
really is.
It,
That's the yeah morning news. Some of your viewers may not know, but the network morning news, like General Good Morning America and Today, those things were taken over by the entertainment divisions of the networks decades ago.
right.
They have a teeny little news segment in it. You know, they'll stop the host and like, so here's how you make chocolate cake and destroy Donald Trump.
Right.
We have a headline over here, and they go to somebody standing there. So Supreme Court's going to rule on gay marriage today. Thank you. Okay, now back to how to destroy Donald Trump. I mean, that's kind of
Right.
that's but the entertainment industries are the ones who took over the morning news. Just the CBS's entertainment had taken over CBS Morning News when I worked on it, and that was in 1983.
Wow.
That was already established. So, but I went out from there. I worked at, I got shifted around to morning news, evening news with Dan Rather, affiliate relations, and the last thing that I worked on was Campaign 84. And that was from, I want to say, probably the last 4 or 5 months of my time there at CBS. And there's a fellow that probably most of your viewers don't know his name, God rest his soul, but his name is Warren Matofsky. And Warren Matofsky was sort of the father of political polling. He invented it, he created it and the whole bit, and was so I learned all about political polling from him because I was working in the election unit in the Campaign 84 election unit. That was Reagan Mondale, and it was really interesting just listening to these people are really, and I'm not talking about their politics or their religion, or I'm talking about their profession. Man, are these people dedicated? Are they, even today, they are dedicated. People would come in easily, routinely, an hour before their shift. And I'm talking about large numbers of people. I'm not talking about like the occasional like little office kiss butt boy who wanted to impress the boss. I'm talking about this was the routine. And when they hit the door, they knew everything. Whatever time they'd gotten up or gone to bed, they had read everything. And again, this is back in the 80s when there is no internet. I mean, you had to physically go somewhere and get a hard copy newspaper, and you had to read it and go through it. I mean, it was this kind of dedication. Granted, a lot of them lived in Manhattan. They just walked down the street and there's 5,000 newspaper stands, but nonetheless, they did it. They knew everything about every story. They're slant, but they knew everything about every story. They were there an hour before their shift, sometimes an hour or two after. And I know because I had to join, I couldn't leave. So I'm like, well, okay. So I learned that level of dedication to this very early on. I was always kind of like that anyway, personality-wise. I was like, let's just get the job done and do a good job and leave it on the field. I mean, I've always been sort of, except in accounting, I've always been sort of that kind of guy. But it really got reinforced with these people that I used to work with. Marlene Sanders, Charles Kuralt, Charles Osgood, Sam Roberts was the foreign desk political reporter, Morton Dean. I thought Rather was a complete jerk, but all of this pertains to him as well. They knew what they had to do, and they set about to do it. It's like the black guy, the black hat cowboys running out there doing their thing, and they're going to burn down that town and leave nothing behind.
Let's call dedicated. That let's call that a combination of passion and discipline. And I talk about that a lot. I use as my example, my favorite example is poor Allen Iverson, who got caught with his quip about practice. Don't talk to me about practice. Meanwhile, the point is that, Allen, you have to have a combination of talent and passion with the discipline to refine it into something special. And I've always felt like it was a good contrast. And he had tremendous talent, but he may not have had the attention and the discipline that, say, Michael Jordan had. How about your values? Now, you're going to walk me through this in the level of your faith and your passion at the time for your faith, but also at this point in time, your values. Were you right of center and sticking out, or were you below the radar of? I mean, we have this understanding that mainstream media is kind of left, maybe hard left.
Yeah, I don't think there was I certainly think that was true on an upper management, senior management level back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, like the Walter Cronkites of the world, for example. I don't know that it had been, at least it wasn't my experience from what I looked at. It didn't appear to be this really heavy, top-down, oppressive, you must think this way kind of thing that it is now. It very clearly is that now. Again, this is before the days of cable news. This is everything. It's just CBS, NBC, and ABC, and that's it. And I don't think there was the degree that we see of it now when we think of the media, where it was completely pervasive. It really wasn't so much that back then. I remember quite a few stories, and I would say that was probably true of the wire services as well. I was when I was my senior year in high school, October is when Pope John Paul was elected Pope. And, it was all the rage, and, it was all the communism, him sort of standing there against the Soviet Union and shaking his finger at the communists a year later. I was at CBS when all of that was going on.
Wow.
And it got really good treatment, I have to say. I mean, the story was not like, oh, here's this homophobic, guy in a white dress who, doesn't like, these Marxists who are trying to save the world. It wasn't that approach at all. It was very much, the Cold War was still going on. That was the atmosphere. And John Paul really was treated, I would probably say in some respects, probably more than fair by the secular media. And some of the church issues, I would say, were also the same, maybe not quite as much. But, John Paul was kind of a world hero, and he was treated like that by the media, by Dan Rather. And I used to hear the conversations in the newsrooms, both at CBS in New York and also out in affiliate land. And I don't know what I would say the turning point was for all of this. I have an idea. But I would say that somewhere between late 1980s, 88, 89, somewhere in there, maybe kind of the fall of communism era. Well, not the fall, the collapse of the Soviet Union would be more accurate. Communism is alive and well. Just go to your local Democratic Party headquarters. Somewhere around there is where I think things in the media started to turn hard left, as in a pervasive, everybody in the media who either held a microphone or was on camera or anything. And you start to see that also because of probably coincided with the collapse of the Soviet Union a year or so later, the rise of Bill Clinton. And that whole mesh there, I think, created an atmosphere in which it became safe to be a progressive liberal, whereas these guys were all there before. But, most people are shocked to find out just how incredibly liberal Walter Cronkite was. But he didn't come across as that. He was considered at one time the most trusted man in America, Uncle Walter. And
safe is one thing, Michael. Safe is one thing, but intolerant is quite another. I don't know if you still have connections with CBS. There's a fantastic reporter, Cheryl Atkinson. Do you know Cheryl?
Yes. Yeah, I don't know her, but I know who she is.
Fantastic reporter. She was forced out, almost entrapped into criminal. They were planting things on her computer, both her work and her personal computer. Are you kidding me? Yeah. That's disturbing.
Bernie Goldberg was at CBS when I was there, And while he certainly was a liberal, I don't know that it would have necessarily. He did a lot of economic reports and things like that, and I don't, I never really kind of got the idea that this was some, wild-eyed, blood dripping from his teeth, let's destroy Western civilization guy. I'm certainly his politics even now are like well left. But when you hear him talk when he's on Fox sometimes, for example, or some other outlets, he talks about, well, let's have some sort of balance here as we, let's hear both sides. And that's, which is why he's not at CBS anymore, because the other side is not interested in allowing the other side to talk, to get and not interested in it. My goodness, they try to squash them at every possible turn, giant media and the tech and all that. This is everything that we were warned about 25 years ago, that you put the control of information into the hands of 3, 4, 5 people and watch out. Well, here we are. Right. They stole an election. Right. They've stolen a country in the process. They first stole a party, then they stole an election. Now they're stealing the country. And when you look at all of this and you say, wow, this was all really largely accomplished through the media. That's what it was. When you go back and you look at the Vietnam War coverage, and American conservatism is a horrible thing. It's kind of how it was portrayed. Look at all these poor innocent war victims. The cameras were rarely trained. In the Vietnam War on the atrocities of the North Vietnamese. I mean, the Khmer Rouge were every bit as noteworthy as the SS. In some cases, even more so. And you never really saw any treatment of that.
The tactics are very similar. Not to step on you, and I want to come back up to your progression, your personal progression. The tactics are very similar to exactly what's going on with YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. The level of censorship is Orwellian. It's absolutely Orwellian. Any dissent, whether in the approach to the coronavirus and the crackdowns and so forth, it's really, really disturbing. The upside is that it's showing the power in the elite in being fearful of real information. But what's your take on that and your experiences with YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and the crackdown?
Oh, well, I mean, we've undergone a few things here, but we were talking about this back in 2000 internally. We were talking about all this back in 2015 when it looked like Hillary. I'm pretty sure she had announced, and she was screwing Bernie and the bros out of their the nomination. And I was talking to a couple of our people here, and I said we need to be prepared for something, because she gave this speech in 2017. It was before that. I can't remember exactly, but she said religious beliefs and values are going to have to change. And did she just say what I think she said? So I gathered a few of our people and I said, okay, we need to have some sort of system in place, because there's no way they're gonna let us remain unscathed here. And we had a intense but certainly smaller audience back then, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And so we started developing internally, okay, how can we build our own firewalls? How can we build our stuff? How can we do all this? So we've been of this mindset for a number of years now, and we've got some pretty good internal security, and that's all I'll say. But as far as associating ourselves with other outfits, we've been deplatformed from Vimeo. But again, we were in the process of building something, anticipating that would happen. So,
and Vimeo subscription, you have to pay for Vimeo, and you still went deplatformed. Unbelievable.
Yeah, we actually used to pay them. I can't remember what it was now. I think it was like $1,000 a month or something to host the videos, and off we went. We keep getting strikes from YouTube. So as a result, we just don't put things on anymore that we know will get a strike. if any of your viewers have seen our evening news, we do not let an evening newscast go by without saying the unelected President Biden. He is the president. That's true. He's the president because he took the oath. Stand on the Bible, he took the oath. That makes you the president. Winning the election doesn't make you the president. Getting all the electoral college votes you need, 270 or more, doesn't make you president. What makes you president, according to the Constitution, is going, boom, I do solemnly swear. That makes, so, well, okay, he did that. How he got to that point was completely illegitimate. It was a theft. It was a deception. It was the whole giant swamp, if you want to call it that, but the whole Marxist left ensuring that Trump would not have another 4 years to blow them up. But he is the president. So we take what we know as one part of that and we combine it with the other part and we say unelected president. Now, as you might imagine, that doesn't fly on YouTube.
My premium subscription to Church Militant has been very rewarding for me, and I do recommend that to all of my audience. Pause, Michael. Bring us back to that progression. There you are, being bounced around to where you are today. Passionate, pro, real values, Catholic, independent media.
When I left CBS after Campaign 84, I bounced around to affiliate land, as I said. I was in Cheyenne, Wyoming as the weekend anchor. That was my first on-air job. I sucked. I was and weekday reporter. Then I went to Duluth, Minnesota. I was there for about a year or so. Then I went to Duluth, Minnesota, again, a CBS. These were all CBS affiliates. I was in Duluth, Minnesota. I was the weekday 5 and 10 o'clock anchor in Duluth. Then I was young and did something stupid and got fired. Had nothing to do with news media. Had everything to do with being an idiot. I got fired, just whatever. Going into the station, having had a couple of drinks across the street. I was 25 and stupid. Anyway, so I went back to New York. I eventually got back into news in Albany. And then I got another job out here in Detroit. And then I moved here to Detroit in 1990, and I was in was it 90? Yeah, 90. Came here in 90. At the time, it was a CBS station. In 95, it was one of those huge numbers of stations that flipped over from a CBS station to a Fox station. But I'd been hired in as a CBS guy at a CBS station. And then about 1998, I just kind of got sick of it. And I did well when I was in it. When I got here in Detroit, I'd learned enough out in kind of small market land and small medium market land and everything. And I'd learned enough to ply my trade reasonably well. I won a number of Emmys and a lot of Emmy nominations and things like that. Most of it was for investigative reporting. And writing and production. But in 1998, I just kind of got sick of it. It was just, by that time, I will tell you, many of your audience may remember the 1993 case of, 92 case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which was the first major Supreme Court ruling on abortion since Roe v. Wade 19 years earlier. And everybody and their mother and brother was covering that. There were live trucks all over the place outside of the Supreme Court on that morning, and they handed down the decision. It was in June, I believe, if I remember correctly. And the big kind of fly in the ointment for both sides was Sandra Day O'Connor. It was the first, Reagan appointee, and she was the first, and she had absolutely zero record on abortion. She had never ruled on an abortion case at all. And so nobody knew where she stood. And everybody was relatively sure these four are liberal, these four are not. And whichever way she goes, well, she went obviously with the pro-abort side in a 5-4 ruling. And I was standing in the newsroom. We were all watching all of the, typical being in a TV newsroom is there's, dozens of monitors all over the walls, and you're watching everybody else's feeds and everything else. and everything was trained on that one shot. And when the CBS reporter who came running down the stairs with it and was getting herself all on was Rita Braver, and she was flipping through, and she got to the summary, and she said, so it is they have scrapped the old trimester measure or standard, and they have gone to a new standard. Undue burden is what it says here, that it doesn't place an undue burden on the woman. So states may regulate to some degree. And then she said, but the core holding of Roe, that there is a constitutional right to abortion, has been left intact in a 5-4 ruling. Practically the entire newsroom blew up in cheers. They were high-fiving each other. Some of the women were crying and carrying on and hugging and da-da-da-da-da. And just for no reason other than the fact that my desk happened to be away from that central area, I had sort of a wide view of that scene. And I just thought to myself, I remember consciously going through my mind, wow, I don't have anything in common with these people. And that was just abortion. But, I think as you get older, you begin to realize that there isn't just, one or two issues and everything else you guys agree on. I think the beauty of the Trump years was that it exposed that. There is no middle ground when you're talking about intrinsic evils. And there's no middle ground when you're talking about, is America first from political perspective? Is it America first, or America first some days, but other days maybe 13th? I mean, there is no middle ground there. And
I think that's pretty.
So I started to recognize
pretty foundational, though, Michael. It's pretty foundational.
Yeah.
By the way, that happened to be 10 years from your entering in to your line of demarcation where you had that realization, 83 to 93.
That's correct.
And to have that, the issue of abortion is pretty fundamental and indicative of a whole value set that, you probably had very little in common on other issues as well.
As we walked through it, it was my news director, because that was 92 and the election was 92, a few months later. My news director, who was I suppose I can go ahead and say it because it was true. He was a cokehead and an adulterer and just a really despicable human being. Actually came up to me the night of the election when Clinton had won and did one of these to me. And if your audience can see it, he's like pushing me. He goes, "Ha, see, your guy lost. You guy," talking about George Bush, who wasn't particularly my guy. I never was really fond of him, but I was not a Clinton guy. So, but yeah, it was very clear that that year was 92, I guess, was into 93 was kind of the awakening time for me to say, we aren't really just reporting on these things. I mean, everybody has their own opinions. Every reporter has his or her own opinions. But it was clear that, like I'd said earlier, somewhere around that time period, it started to be okay to let people know that I'm in the media and the media hates anything that's traditional. News media. I mean, all the media does, but my world is the news media. And it just seemed like you were given the approval to go ahead and say and do whatever it was you wanted to say and do then. And it just has really kind of accelerated. You get to the point, I mean, that's almost 30 years ago, and it's just completely off the hook now. I don't think you could get hired if you didn't. If you didn't support all of that. So
that's not news. That's propaganda. That's not news. That's propaganda. Oh, yeah. It's a radical difference, though. Being outnumbered and frustrated is a radical change from maintaining your own real independent media outlet. So how did that
Absolutely.
happen?
By the way, your viewers will remember that was about the same time that the conservative media began. That's when Rush Limbaugh came onto the scene. God rest his soul. Right. So there immediately began kind of a counter
polarization.
Yeah, and it was good. It's never been as powerful as the other guys. They've got all the money, they've got all the talent, they've got all the everything. And in our newsroom, for example, we call it the pit out here, I'm always telling the staff, I'm like, and we've got CNN on. We don't listen to them, but we look at their graphics and stuff. We've got Fox News audio up and their images and CNN images, and I'm always looking up, going, guys, look at that, and it's always professional. I mean, it's evil, but it's professional. It's well done. Everybody is neatly buttoned up. There's not a detail missed. It's that professionalism. And there was God bless him, there was this lovely, lovely, holy priest, Catholic priest, Father John Harden, who was here he died here in Detroit in right around 2000. And he used to dub it the Luciferian media. And I have since plagiarized, because I'm one of Joe Biden's fans. I have plagiarized that term, because that is exactly it. Whenever the devil comes as the angel of light, he comes as the best angel of light. You don't get to see like his talons sticking out from under his angel robe or a horn popping out blocking his halo. He's got himself completely buttoned down. That's why sin is attractive. I'm sorry, that's not, sin's attractive because of our flaw, but it gets presented very attractively.
Right. Well put.
And and you just look at it and I was like, yeah, that really sums it up, doesn't it? It's the Luciferian media. There's not a thing missed. It's deceptive as can be. There's always some little kind of, sort of, maybe element of the truth. Like mostly peaceful protests. I mean, they didn't deny there were protests. They just put a few adjectives in front of them to change the meaning of them.
Right.
So, on theological terms, we'd call that a heresy.
Very slick manipulation.
It's very, very slick.
How did you make your break?
It's very well done.
92 to 93. How and when did you make your break?
I decided that I was leaving in 90, I want to say it was 1995. I was leaving work for the day, and I was becoming generally disenchanted with just some of the stories. A lot of them on a local market are like sales department driven, and it just didn't strike me as journalism. I mean, it sometimes it was bad journalism, biased journalism, but a lot of the other time it was just stupid, and just self-aggrandizing, prop up the sales department, go do a live shot from some car dealer's dealership and talk about how they're giving away, I don't know, cotton candy to poor kids or something. And it was just a thing that they'd worked out with the sales department. So I was like, well, I was just I started getting a much more sour taste in my mouth for the whole industry. And I was walking out of work one day and my news director says to me, hey, such and such is sick. We need you to do this story for us for the 6 o'clock show. I'm like, oh, okay. So I put my bag back down, sat down. I'm like, what's the story? And the producer came over and handed me a couple pieces of paper. And the pieces of paper were, and apologies in advance to anyone in your audience who might take a little bit of offense at this, but some of your people will probably remember in the many iterations which Madonna put herself in. One of them was that one where she had that, I don't even know what it was a bra, but it looked like the 2 Towers of Babel. And she was in town for a concert, and she's from the Detroit area originally. She's from Rochester, Michigan, suburb of Detroit. And she was in town for a concert, and the sales department wanted to hype it up because, I don't know, we had something about whatever. We were related to that concert as a station. And I'm sitting there writing. They wanted me to write a story for reading on the air about Madonna's bra. And I'm looking at the paper, and I'm like, you really? And I'm like, ugh. So I start writing and typing away, and the thought came into my head, I got a Notre Dame degree. I don't really have a lot in common with any of these guys as far as their politics or anything like that. what am I doing here? What am I doing here? So I decided I'd start my own production company, which I did. And so for the next 2 years, I kind of, I had one foot in this world and one in this. I was trying to create a nice bridge to get over to the other one. And, they pay you just enough in TV to make it hurt if you leave. But they don't pay you anywhere near what you deserve, especially because your soul costs a lot of money. And so anyway, I eventually made the jump and I left. And one of the very first jobs I got as a subcontractor was producing commercials for General Motors here in Detroit. I ran into an old buddy from news. He said, "Hey, I know these guys. I know you're out, contracting and doing stuff on your own. You ever thought about doing corporate stuff?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's kind of what I want to do." And he said, "Well, I know this guy at General Motors, blah, blah, blah." Next thing I know, I'm doing that. And I'm making literally 10 times the amount of money that I was making before. And a lot of that money became the seed money to get Church Militant and St. Michael's Media up and going. My mother, when she died, God rest her soul, had left me a big chunk of money, which was the initial investment money. But then to keep it going for the next 2 years, because you have your seed money, that's fine. If you're going to build a house, you're going to buy a house, hey, that's great. But now you need to furnish it, and you need to keep paying the water bills and the heat bills and mowing the lawn and everything else. So my mom's money that she had left me became the initial investment. But then over the next 2 years, when you're starting up and, you got to pay people's salaries and you don't really have any income to speak of, that became kind of the way to get to this. And, it's really just been, the grace of our Lord, our Blessed Mother, St. Michael, helping people see the truth, capital T, seeing Him, and how all of this plays out in the world. And I will say that our effort here has certainly been helped by world events. There's a reason evil likes to stay in the shadows. Good doesn't ever really like to stay in the shadows. As our Lord said, why would you stick your lamp under a bushel basket, light it up and stick it and light up the whole house, let everybody see your works, so they may give glory to God, not for your own sake, but but evil likes to stay in the shadows because it gets much more accomplished in the shadows, much more accomplished. So as all of these various sets of world events in politics, in the culture, and the church, I'm sad to say, as these things have come more to light, some of them dragged into the light, as these things have become more exposed and more known, some people's eyes open up more and they begin to see, ooh, and that was my experience too. I had no idea all this stuff was going on, certainly not in the church. Little bit maybe in the culture, but I was a Reagan supporter and thought, hey, America's great and USA, and it never even occurred to me that one day we'd be actually fighting socialism in our own country and losing badly. But
the transition. How about the religious transition? So there you are doing work for GM, and you still have you're working on your own independent media outlet and building it. How did you make that transition, first to your own personal walk and dedication, and then to your subject matter to where you are today?
Sure. I was personal. I was living, I was never not a Catholic. I was a bad Catholic. I wasn't really living the faith. I wasn't denying it in the sense of, I was going to go change religions or didn't care or anything. I knew everything I was doing was wrong. Every bit, I knew it. I'm not even really quite sure I would ever even have actually defended it, to be honest with you. I just did the old famous whistle past the graveyard and, kind of look the other way. And if the topic came up, just kind of leave the room and that sort of thing. I never pretended any of my mostly sexual, but not exclusively sexual activities were good or proper or anything like that. I never thought that. But my mom, God bless her, was not about to let this go. And she kept hammering and hammering and hammering and the whole bit. And something that perhaps some of your audience may be, I don't know, maybe unaware of, if their backgrounds are Protestant or non-denominational or evangelical. Not all, certainly, but a large part of Catholic theology is centered around the idea of redemptive suffering by people. So, a Catholic phrase would be offer it up. So if something's going bad, or you order something for dinner and they plop the wrong thing down or something, well, you can either complain, which I do, or friends around you will say, shut up and offer it up, meaning offer it up, unite it to the sufferings of Christ on the cross. That doesn't make the sufferings of our Lord, become larger or better, but it conforms you to them. And that's the point. So my mom, very solid Catholic, Irish Catholic, was praying left and right, sometimes with me in the room, saying, "Oh, Jesus, please help Michael." And my brother was off the skids as well. Please help them, live according to the truth, and blah, blah, blah. She went on like that for years, praying like that. And she told me one day that she just lost her mind with Jesus and said, "Jesus, I don't care what you have to do to me. Do whatever you have to do, but spare the eternal lives of my two sons." And about 2 weeks later, she got stomach cancer. And it was actually very strange how they found it. She was just going in. She'd always had acid reflux stuff for years and years and years, like 15, 20 years. So she'd always go in about every, 8 months or a year or so. And this time they went in and they told her, "Well, you've got stomach cancer. This is, first of all, very early. It looks like it's probably less than a month," which would have been right at the time she said that prayer. "And it's an extremely rare kind of stomach cancer. This is a type of cancer that is isolated almost exclusively to native-born Japanese and remains on the island in Japan." Now, first of all, my mom hated Asian food. She couldn't stand it. She was never eating it. It was nothing like that. She was just never sort of like, "Really? That you were exposed to like a Japanese stomach stomach cancer?" Anyway, she was. So the doctor, she had surgery, and about 2 weeks after that was discovered, and then the doctor told her about 6 months later it was back. It was stage 4, and she had about 2 or 3 months left to live. And it was incredibly aggressive. And they'd cut it out. And then, the doctor's famous line, "We got it all." No, you didn't. And so anyway, since she had been given such a little short window to live, I told my dad, when I was talking to him. My mom was on the phone too, but she was obviously a little shell-shocked when she heard that. So I said, "You guys need to get out here to Detroit. I mean, I'm doing my own business. I can't leave, and Dad, you're going to need help taking. So, you're retired, everything, just get rid of what you need to get rid of and get out here. Mom, if Mom's going to die in a couple of months, she's at some point, probably in the very near future, she's not going to be able to get on a plane. They won't let her on a plane if she's all, sick, and they won't let her on the plane, and you won't be able to make a drive out here from New York." So my dad, boy, God bless him, he sold the house, got rid of all the furniture, did everything in 2 weeks flat. Got my mom out here. I, in the meantime, had set up this nice, I'm not sure, it's like an apartment, assisted living, medical care, treatment-y thing. I'd gotten all that together for them here, so they had a place to come straight into. Gone out and bought all the furniture for them to put into this nice little apartment thing and everything. And my dad goes back to New York. He finishes up whatever paperwork stuff he needs to do. He comes back here. And then this sounds gruesome, but we're sort of waiting at this point for my mom to die. And she didn't. She kept living. When somebody tells you 2 or 3 months, you're thinking, oh my gosh, you're not going to live to see my next birthday. Oh, you're not going to see Christmas. Oh, you won't see Thanksgiving. I mean, all those thoughts go through your head. And, you won't be here for the next Notre Dame football season. We used to watch the games all the time together. So all those things are racing through your mind. And then she just kept living. She just kept living. And she wasn't getting better, but she wasn't getting any worse. She got here to Detroit and she plateaued. And about probably 14 months later, I get a phone call from my brother's wife that he was 48, that he had just dropped dead of a heart attack. And I was like, what? And I was out shooting a commercial for General Motors for Hummer. At the time they had Hummer out in Colorado outside of Denver. And I get the phone call. I'm like, what? And so anyway, obviously I go down to the funeral. My parents can't travel. They were in Corpus Christi at the time, Texas. And I went up to my brother's body in the coffin at the funeral home. And I called my mom and I said, hi, Mom, I'm standing over Marshall's body right now. Is there anything you want me to say or do? And she said, well, yes, give him a kiss for me, Michael, and let him know that I'll see him soon. And that's really, my dead brother's in front of me. I'm rubbing my hands through his hair. He had this really thick blonde hair. And I'm rubbing my hands through his hair. I gave him a kiss on the forehead from my mom. I've got my mom on the phone. And all of a sudden, that was the moment. That was like the beginning of that little quick journey for me. Everything that I knew I'd been taught as a kid about the faith and heaven and hell and salvation and sin, and it all just came flooding in right there. And it was that realization that, oh my gosh, all that stuff is true. Because, I was a goofy, immature, even in my 40s. I was just stupid and immature and do whatever I want and just, I wouldn't say off the charts. I wasn't, some Skid Row drug addict or anything, but, I had my profession nailed down well, I was doing really well, but it just, where the stuff that really matters, the spiritual life, I was just out to lunch. And even with all the training from childhood and, Catholic schools, and most of the Catholic schools I went to back in the 60s and 70s were good. And, but it all just came crashing home. I'm like, oh my gosh, people actually die. And they really die. This is it. My brother's dead. My brother's in heaven or hell right now. Or purgatory, but whatever, he's saved or he's not. And I'm talking on the phone to my mom, like, oh my gosh, and this is going to be true of my mom in some weeks or a few months or something too. And it just all hit me right then. So I came back after the funeral, my brother's funeral and stuff, I came back to Detroit, and the conversations that I had been having with my mom up to that point suddenly got really real. They got real. And about 2 months or so, 2 or 3 months before my mom eventually died, which was 10 months after my brother, my mom just said to me one day, she was laying on this little couch and she had her hand over her stomach, and she used to describe the cancer pain as like millions of little pieces of glass, sharp glass, just churning around inside you. And she grabbed her stomach and she was like, ooh, and she said, Michael, I probably won't be here much longer. And I don't want to be in heaven knowing you're in hell. And that's quite the statement to hear. It's probably quite the statement to make, but I didn't make it. I heard it. And I can assure you that is quite the statement to hear from your dying mother. And, a few, I think it was about a month, maybe 2-3 weeks later, she went into the hospice facility. And then 6 weeks after that, she died. And I was at her coffin, like I had been beside my brother's coffin 10 months earlier. And I was like, wow, this is all true. It's almost too much for your emotional mind to get. And so I reached my hand out and put it on my mom's womb, over her womb. And I said, Mom, what you went through for me, because remember that prayer, I don't care what you have to do it to me, but save them. I said, Mom, what you went through for me, you will not have gone through in vain. I'm a changed man. And at that point, very shortly after that point, my father and I flew my mom's body back to New York, because they had their graves already 25 years ago. They had their graves marked out there. And then in the hotel, the night we buried my mom, that before we were coming back to Detroit, my father confessed to me that that when he was getting out of the Air Force back in the 50s, and had brought my mom back from England, they met in England, and my brother was 3 months old. He had gone off to go do whatever he had to do to get out of the Air Force for a week somewhere in southwestern Ohio. So my mom and my brother were staying at his parents' house, and my grandfather, my father's father, raped my mother. And she was 20, she wasn't quite yet 21. And that caused all sorts of stuff, the emotional problems for my mom, really until she died 50 years later. And we grew up around all of that stuff. And, she had severe case of bipolar depression, very severe case, a horrible case of obsessive compulsive disorder. And, it made childhood really challenging, made it really difficult. And, it was difficult for my father. I didn't get into an awful lot with him and stuff, but I'll just say that when he told me that, an awful lot of stuff that I'd always kind of wondered about, all the light bulbs went on. And I'm like, oh, that's why. And you can sort of begin to say, so this is what I was kind of reacting against incorrectly. I mean, it was my own choice. Nobody held a gun to my head. But I'm like, that's where kind of this weird motivation to do all of this stuff came from. And so all these lights are coming on. And it was
Wow.
It was quite the thing. So, I at that point, I kind of came roaring back to the faith and said, oh my gosh, it was in a sense, it was like the prodigal son moment. I was like, oh my gosh, there's that famous line in there. It's like, at last he came to his senses.
Michael, that's still divine appointment as far as I'm concerned, and personal decision on your part. There are many, many people that use personal tragedy as an excuse to run from Christ. And let me also add, it's fascinating. There is scripture to back up what you had said earlier, and it's interesting that you would put it in those terms of a quantifying of pain and challenge towards conformity of Christ. Paul in Colossians 1:24 mentions something similar to that.
He says exactly that. That's actually where the church's teaching from that comes from.
I
make up in my own sufferings what's lacking in the sufferings of the body of Christ, his church.
Excellent. And I like to point out Romans 8:29 that says that our ultimate destiny is to conform to the image of Christ. And unfortunately, that in this life, that's through pain and challenge.
Absolutely. You as the stupendous holy Bishop Archbishop Fulton Sheen used to say, you cannot have an Easter Sunday without first a Good Friday. So
very true.
That's very true.
Is that where you made your crossover in content for you now have a private company in media?
No, I was at that. Yeah, I have my private company. I'm still doing General Motors commercials, all that's in, in news thing, media stuff for them. And I started reading voraciously. I read every single thing I could get my hands on about the faith. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, solid biblical commentaries, Bishop Sheen, Father Hardin. I mean, if it existed, I read it. I probably read I don't know, probably 10,000 pages in that year and a half. Uh, uh, that first year and a half when I came back to the church. And then in my travels, because I used to travel all over the place with General Motors. I was a million miler like every second or third year. A lot of international travel and everything. So I spent a lot of time in airports and a lot of time on planes. And that was the exact same time that the Da Vinci Code movie and book had by Dan Brown had come out, and everybody and their mother and brother was reading this. I used to become infuriated because I'd come back to the faith, and I'm like, "Thank you, Jesus, thank you." Oh, go on. And then here's this book insulting him, degrading him and his work, and the work of salvation and redemption and everything else. And everybody's just sitting there reading it, like, "Ooh, this is great." It's not very often they actually produce a book and a movie in that kind of close proximity to each other. So in case they couldn't propagandize the non-readers,
Right.
well, they made a movie for them. And I was just spitting bullets. I mean, this was a man here, our Lord, that I'd come to love and was grateful to, and all of that. And here they are spitting on him all over again.
I was teaching a Bible study at the time, Michael, and I got kicked out because of this topic. And I told the adults in the class that you do realize that this work of fiction claiming sex with Mary Magdalene makes Christ no longer applicable as Savior. He's no longer qualified as Savior. And someone in the class said, "Well, it's no big deal. Christ is big enough to handle something like that." And then I had a strong debate with this guy. I was kind of angry myself, and I actually got kicked out of that church because of the very issue that got you upset. Fascinating.
Oh yeah. So I said to my dad, I said I'm just and I said, I'm going to make it, because this whole time I'd come back to the faith, this like year and a half-ish or so. So when my mom died until the Da Vinci Code stuff was going on, was about a year and a half or so, year and 8 months, something in that time frame. And that whole time I was saying to my dad, I want to do something, for the church. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And blah, 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 I'm not quite sure. And he was like, well, it'll come to you. Don't be anxious. And I'm like, well, I'm not anxious. I'm impatient. I want to do this. He's like, it'll come to you. It'll come to you. So the Da Vinci Code comes out. I'd saved up, a decent amount of money from my work, my GM work, and I said, Dad, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to produce a documentary on all the errors of the Da Vinci Code, all the theological errors of the Da Vinci Code. And I'll use some of the money I've got. I've got all the equipment in my own production company, so that part's easy. I'll write it. I'm a pretty decent writer. I can put this together. I understand what the theological stuff is about it, put it together, and then I'll buy time on local TV, and I'll run what amounts to sort of a 30-minute infomercial, but there won't be anything for you to buy. It'll just be a thing. Here, watch it like a History Channel thing. And he's like, well, that sounds great. That sounds great. So, Johnny, for the very first time in my life, I sat down in front of a computer and I could not write. I've always been able to sit and just start writing. I let all the stuff kind of percolate in my head, and then I start writing. And I can write relatively quickly. My brain just works that way and all that. And thanks be to God. There's lots of things I suck at, but writing I'm good at. And I'm sitting there and nothing's happening. I never hit one keystroke because I kept saying in my logic, I'm like, well, if I say, okay, but before we'd say that, we have to say this first. I'm like, okay, I'll start. Well, no, I can't start there because there's something even before that. And I just kept doing that, like logical regression. And I just called my dad and I said, Dad, this won't work. The problem isn't the Da Vinci Code. The problem is people believe the Da Vinci Code because they don't know anything about the faith. That's the problem. And he's like, well, what are you thinking? And I said, well, I think there needs to be some sort of show to explain the faith to people. And it can't be one show. It's way too big to be able to explain the faith in like one 30-minute, infomercial type thing. So it'd have to be regular. And it'd probably have to be like every week. And Uh, and he's like, well, and my dad's like, well, what are you saying? I said, I'm not really sure exactly what I'm saying, but it seems like we need to produce a show. I need to produce some sort of TV show about the faith that has a very, kind of let's go back and learn the truths of the faith kind of thing on an ongoing basis. And he said, well, you don't have a studio. Would you have to shoot that in a studio? I'm like, yeah, I think I would. And we just kept talking. At the end of that like hour and a half talk or something, I was like, well, there's no way to do this except go get a building, go rent a building, rent a space.
Wow.
I have to hire some people. I have to get new equipment. I've got da 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 da. And the next thing I know, it's like $800,000 later, and we're producing a show on local Detroit television. Funny enough, the Catholic diocese here didn't want anything to do with it. The station was it wasn't exclusively Protestant, like Sunday worshipy kind of stuff that was on throughout the whole week. It wasn't exclusively that, but it was largely that. That should have been my very first signal there was something wrong in the church. They're like, it's probably not something we're interested in. It was just this very kind of vague, whatever. And I'm like, well, okay, well, maybe the Protestants will like my money. So I went over there and I gave them whatever. I think it was $1,500 an hour, if I remember correctly. And we put it on twice a Sunday, every Sunday. So it was about $12,000 to $15,000 a month to air it. And it gave us a little bit of traction, and that show is that's the very first show on the premium channel, which is the One True Faith. And we shot 100, I think it was like 110 or so episodes in studio, and I had probably, I don't know, maybe a half dozen or something on the road in different places. And that was really kind of the beginning of what all of this was. And for the first 3 years, Johnny, the whole thing was theological. I didn't know about the corruption in the church. I hadn't made the connection in my head between the corruption in the culture being a result of the corruption in the church. I hadn't made any of those connections. And then Obama went to Notre Dame in May of 2009, and all the light bulbs went on again for me. And that's where we made the big turn and became kind of what you see now as Church Militant. So the single force behind all corruption of truth is the diabolical, is the demonic. So that it happens to play on two different battlefields inside the same greater spiritual war, politics or the culture and the church, that battle is going on. I mean, that can't really surprise anybody. You look back on some of this stuff when you realize sort of where you are and sort of what you're staring at. And you think to yourself, wow, how could I have been so dumb for so long? And I really was. I was, and I'd come out of investigative reporting. I used to chase down child molesters with the police. I used to go hunt serial killers with the local sheriffs. I mean, I did, we used to, white collar crime where they'd rip off these poor little old ladies in the nursing homes. They'd take their $1 million and, steal it from them. All sorts of stuff like that. So it's not like I was just some, hay munching dude from the backwaters somewhere. I'd already been exposed to all this stuff on a cultural level, and I was in news, and I still didn't make the connection about all this stuff is in the church too. Well, but like they say, you can't unring the bell. Now I see it.
Well, and it takes tremendous ethics and morality to grab that truth and run with it, as opposed to being embarrassed with it, sweeping it under the carpet. What about, so this is 2009. Do you remember the date of your Louisiana Strong presentation on Saul Alinsky? Because that was darn good.
That would have been right around that time, maybe late 2009, early 2010.
Okay.
I kind of came into the whole Saul Alinsky because and so your audience understands why the Obama thing turned the lights on for me. Obviously, I went to Notre Dame. I attended Notre Dame, graduated in '83, and I was a little kid, wanted to go there since I was 7. I wanted to be the leprechaun, all that stuff, and was completely immersed in the Notre Dame stuff. And and I remember being on campus, and I watched Air Force One with Obama on it fly over the Golden Dome, big statue of Our Lady on top. It's like 25 feet tall, golden leaf statue. And here comes Air Force One with the landing gear opening up right over the dome. And I just started crying. I felt like the devil was coming into the garden. That's exactly what it felt like. And I was like shaking and crying, and it's just something was really soul disturbing here. There's something really horribly evil going on here. And you wouldn't really, I mean, at this point, Obama had only been president for 4 months, I think it was. This was May. Yeah, the inauguration was in January. Right. I mean, I was under no illusion that he was an okay guy. I mean, he kills children. So, anything's possible. And he kills them by the millions. But there was nothing, at least policy-wise, that was any more out there than just any other Democrat in the Democratic field. But there was always something about him that struck me as beyond just bad, that he was actually sinister. And for him to be coming into Notre Dame and then getting draped with honors and all that stuff and everything. And I wondered why, how was it possible that he can come to these sort of the premier Catholic universities, certainly in America, and, to some, depending on how you would, slice that, the premier Catholic university in the world. How does he come here and this all happen? Where's all the opposition from the bishops? Why is the student body applauding this guy and cheering like he's our Lord? And it
didn't happen overnight, did it, Michael? It didn't happen overnight. No. You mentioned that President Hesburgh created basically a forum for Alinsky to come in and make connections with Monsignor Egan and foment this radical leftist ideology. It didn't just pop up overnight.
Yeah, what you see, and the analogy I always use is, most people won't see the very tip of a periscope, hovering above the water. They won't see it. They just don't see it. Even if you do see it, it doesn't really look that imposing. It's just this little periscope sticking up above the water. And if you don't think, oh, I'll bet you there's a submarine on the other side of that periscope, then you just kind of ignore it. But the submarine is always there.
Right.
It's when it surfaces and you see this big giant, 15 football field long nuclear submarine that can wipe out the Earth if it launched its entire payload. You're like, oh, and Obama being at Notre Dame for me was like the periscope. And then I remember specifically driving back that next day, Sunday, that day when it was over, to Detroit. It's only like a 2.5 hour drive from South Bend to Detroit. And I was just noodling over every bit of this and just saying, wow, something's really, how come? And I thought, I need to learn stuff here. So I started reading some different articles. Obviously, the internet's running at this time, 2009. Bit clunky still, but still running. And I start reading things. I start getting in touch with people, various authors and people, and I'm calling that one. I'm reading this one's essay. I'm reading that one's book. And I'm starting to see the picture come together. And I'm like, so it was about, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 months around, somewhere in that neighborhood, within a year after that I produced the very first FBI that we did, a faith-based investigation called Saul Alinsky and the Bishops. And that goes back to, a couple of crooked priests dealing with an atheist who was part of this whole Marxist revolution of wanting to destroy the church and civilization and the whole bit. And I thought, wow, so this was one of the ways they got in the church, the whole social justice warrior stuff. And then you go back and look at Obama, and the Archdiocese of Chicago paid for Obama's community organizing training when he was just out of school. They paid for it. They sent him to Los Angeles to learn how to community
Right.
organize.
Right.
They brought him back to Chicago, and he started his what he was working with, whatever his Saul Alinsky thing was. And it's interesting for any of your viewers who would be really interested in doing a deep dive on this. Go watch the video of Obama's graduation speech at Notre Dame in May of 2009. Just sit back, hearing this conversation between you and I, and then listen to what he says. He thanks Bernardine, Cardinal Bernardine. He talks about how the church got him launched into social justice, the social justice warrior, community organizing, the whole bit. If you want to know what happened, he says everything right there in that speech. And so it was. And of course, the investigative reporter goes off in my head at that point and says, okay, so that's how Obama, that explains why Obama's at Notre Dame. That explains why there's not really any real substantive opposition to him. But how did we get to that point? And that's really been kind of the story of Church Militant for the 12 years now since then.
Absolutely. Michael, it's like there's a system. There's some sort of malignant matrix system that allows the worst of people to filter to the top. And it must be extremely frustrating for you as a good Catholic that in all of these power positions, those who are in and also represent Catholicism don't represent Catholic values. Far
That's
to the
correct.
left, from Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, it's overwhelming. And I'm curious as what, obviously your love for Christ and your desire for his righteousness drives you on, but you gotta feel totally overwhelmed. You basically have no voice in your own church.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we certainly don't have any official voice, but we've got a voice that's a little bit louder, I suppose, than it used to be. And we have there's millions of people who come to the website every month now, and obviously some of those are repeats. I mean, you can just tell. I mean, when I go to, I just gave a retreat in Dallas during Holy Week, and whenever I'm in front of a large crowd, there are about 200 people there, and they come from all over the country. And I always ask in those situations, how many of you were here last year, and how many of you are new? And the number of hands that shot up for new really kind of, it's normally about half and half, maybe 60-40. This was like 80-20. And I was like, wow. And the number of people that came up to me during the retreat, it was really very humbling and happy and kind of all that mix of, feelings that came up to me and said, my aunt or my brother or whoever sent me your stuff during the election, during the campaign, or this or that or something. I started listening and I've come back to the church now, and I hadn't been to Mass in 10 years. I hadn't been to confession in 20 years. I hadn't received Holy Communion in 10 years. And now I'm back. And, it's thanks to Church Militant and all that, which I appreciate the sentiment. I always tell them it's thanks to the Holy Spirit. We're happy to be, we're happy to be the broom, but we're not the ones pushing the broom. And, but you hear all of that, and it's like, well, that is wonderfully rewarding. But again, I'll say the more evil gets exposed, certainly some people will harden themselves and align even closer and more deeply with that evil. They just will. But there are some people who are either naive to it or more like me, just kind of whistling past the graveyard, probably knew it wasn't fine. That's not good, whatever you're doing and all that stuff going on. But, I'm kind of okay. And we got a party this weekend, and I got to take the kids to soccer, and they just get lost in day-to-day stuff. But the more it gets exposed, it's kind of, you sort of move down the spectrum, that you get to another group of people whose eyes are opened, and then they open up other people's eyes, and it keeps going like that. Again, I'll say I think that was the biggest single benefit of Donald Trump winning, that he provoked this division by his person. And in this case, division is a good thing because it exposed the evil. So good for him. and good for us. We were blessed to have that. For whatever reason, our Lord didn't want him to have a second term. I don't know why. I'm not God. But, things have been set in motion now that cannot be unset. And he was the catalyst for that, because he just came in his New York brass way and said, y'all suck, you hate America, screw you, America first. And that caused the explosion. And you're a racist, and you hate this, and you hate that, and you're a hater. And then people who were vaguely aligned politically with some of the stuff Trump said started, and I think correctly, taking it personally. That, whoa, what do you mean? I'm patriotic. There's something wrong with being a patriot? I support America. What the hell? There's nothing wrong with me. And you started that kind of hardening on both sides. And the more it got hardened, the more each side saw, I don't have anything in common with that other side. And good. I'm actually glad this has happened. And the same dynamic has happened in the church, where, there was just all this kind of, the evil submarine was floating under the surface doing its work. Occasionally, some people would see the periscope, but most people didn't, or they didn't want to. They're too busy up on the top deck sunning themselves and having fun to notice anything in the water. And that would be me. And but while all this malignant work, this malevolent work is going on just out of sight, there is much damage was being done to people's psyches, to people's lives, most importantly to their souls. To repeat, psyche is Greek for soul. All of that stuff is going on. And hold on. Okay. All of that stuff is going on just below the surface, and you're like, well. Why? How did this get to this point? How did all of this evil become so just commonplace, and it doesn't even register on people's radars? And I'm sure a number of your followers and things probably wouldn't, may not have heard it before, wouldn't agree or something. But when you move through the results of the sexual revolution to get to where we are now, that was all triggered by contraception and the permissibility of contraception, not theologically. That happened with the Church of England at the Lambeth Conference in 1930, but it was in the courts. The education system had already been invaded with some of the anti-family stuff back at the turn of the century. I mean, the judges on the U.S. Supreme Court that ruled in Griswold v. Connecticut, which legalized contraception, or rather struck down the Comstock laws, which had made contraception illegal, and then 2 years later in the Eisenstadt case, just opened it up for everybody. Those guys are in their 60s and 70s when they were on the court making those rulings. Warren Burger, what's-his-face, Blackmun, all those guys. They're the same people who ruled, a handful of years later about abortion. And it was just one logical sequence after another. So again, if you're sort of tracing, as I've traced sort of how did this happen in the church, going back with the bishop, so you could do the same thing in the culture. How did this happen? How did a court get to the point where it could say this is okay? Okay, these guys are in their 60s in the 1960s. That means they were in law school in the 1920s. So who's in the law schools in the 1920s uncoupling American constitutional principles from foundational truths? It's happening. And if you go back and look at some of those guys, the guys who ruled in Griswold, it wasn't the same people, but I think there were 5 or 6 of the same justices that ruled in Griswold that also ruled in Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton the same day. 5 or 6 of them were the same men. So if you go back and look at those guys' histories, they were already moving this way. Well, it's
fascinating. We do have common ground, and I had to search my own, do my own research and my own value set in this issue, because for Protestants, evangelicals, contraception is not as high a priority, but you're absolutely spot on in relation to the encouragement of free sex and sex for the sake of personal pleasure, and the gray area where suddenly a contraceptive becomes a chemical abortion-inducing drug, and people don't even realize that there are certain aspects of the pill. If you believe that that conception is the point of life, it's not contraception anymore. It's abortion. But there's that gray area that gets people to compromise, and there is common ground. There absolutely is common ground.
It's interesting, Justice Kennedy said in the 92 Planned Parenthood versus Casey case, he said we can't strike down abortion because people have come to order their sexual lives on relying on it if the contraception fails. That is out of the mouth of a U.S. Supreme Court justice in his majority opinion. And it's true. The instant you take sex and you decouple it from its natural end, which is procreation, it's not that pleasure, you can't have pleasure with it. That's not the point. When you say, okay, the child part of it, we're going to throw over here, and now let's just go at it. Okay, well, if that's the case, why does that become, well, then why can't two gays do that? Why can't a brother, sister, and a dog do that? I mean, if you've got a constitutional right to have an orgasm with the person of your choice, well, then you can't confine that to just these two people that said I do at the foot of an altar 20 years ago. It is the right. That's what it is. It has come to be a right to have an orgasm as often as you want with as many people as you want. And if something that would naturally occur does occur, you can therefore kill it because that wasn't the reason you were engaged in the act. And that becomes across the entire spectrum. We just did the story on Evening News a week or two ago about they didn't say in the court filing if it was a father and daughter or a mother and son, but a parent and a child have filed a petition in the state of New York to be able to get married. And I say, why can't they? Right. Why can't they? I mean, if two guys can get married and three people can get married, and these people can have sex with whoever they want, whenever they want. I mean, used to count marriage by number, by sex, by consanguinity, and by consent. Well, once you've gotten rid of one of those, well, why can't you get rid of all of them? Because it becomes about the act of sex, period. It's about my orgasm, and that's the end of it. And if that becomes the milepost, and that's the only milepost, well, then there's no rule. There is no rule, and that's where we are right now.
God bless your independence and your bravery and what you're doing there in St. Michael's. I wanted to throw in one more example, and we'll close.
I just
gotta go.
I got a warning. I gotta go shoot something.
All right, Michael. I'll let you go right now. I wanted to tell you thank you so much, particularly in the vaccines, the eugenics angle to the vaccines. Well done on that report. Truly, truly upsetting and disturbing. I was going to ask you, okay, well, what's the way forward? How are we getting forward? You're paving the way forward by the bravery of what you're doing and just getting the information out there. So thank you so much, Michael. God bless you for what you're doing and spending time with me. Thank you.
You're very good. God bless.
Have a blessed day, Michael. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, so I'm reviewing the interview, and hopefully my beloved flying monkeys, understand why I was so warm. It was absolutely genuine. I thoroughly enjoyed the personal talk with Michael. Thoroughly enjoyed it. The only thing that matters from our perspective is, well, obviously as Christians, for those of us who are Christians, the top priority is your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And we, protesters, consider any affiliation with the Catholic Church detrimental to your very salvation. So if those of us who are Christian feel that way, then obviously all good Catholics need to be in our constant prayer. No less someone like Michael Voris. Beyond that, beyond the well-being of his own soul, is his ethics, and I'll tell you, I'm probably, because I'm so positively affected by enjoying my private time with him, and how I really felt like, you guys make your own judgment. I felt like he was very open. He was covered some things that were quite personal, and so the only other issue is, does Michael Voris present to you the truth to the best of his ability? Now, we all have our subconscious prejudices and biases, and clearly someone who is very, very passionately devoted to Catholicism, there's going to be a lot of emotion that will cloud their judgment. Is he entirely sincere? Will he even participate in disinformation because they help his priorities and his overall agenda? You guys will have to make that decision yourself. I'm not definitive on it, and I'm still basking in the enjoyment of the interview. I do lean, possibly as a result of my own emotional biases now, that a little bit over, and give Michael the benefit of the doubt that to the best of his ability, he's being ethical, truthful, and shooting straight. The fact is, and I absolutely, to this moment, feel that way, feel this way, that he is divinely appointed. In the same way that Walter Veit is divinely appointed to do what he's doing. And yet he too is thoroughly hampered by the chains of religion. His own soul, as close as he is to Christ and total truth, his own soul is still hampered. If you agree with me, then you also agree that even Walter and Michael are very much alike. And it is my prayer, from a Christian perspective, that they be freed from the fetters of religion. Both of those men, I feel very strongly, are divinely appointed to do what they do. And as I've told you many times, I believe I'm pretty sure several times I tried to tell Michael and told Michael, he has insider connections because Rome controls all the governments. Because Roman agents are in run police departments, run news agencies, there are conservative Latin Mass Catholics everywhere that are popping up to give him information that you're just not going to get anywhere else. So that's why I was so thankful to my friend Vinny for helping to facilitate this, and so greatly pleased with the interview. And again, hopefully you guys, my monkeys, will forgive me for getting caught up in the moment and being especially warm. And I'm telling you, it was absolutely genuine. Absolutely genuine. My sentiments of and warmth, prayers and blessings in accordance with the sincerity and truth of Jesus Christ. And I'm overall pleased with the opportunity to do the interview and how the interview turned out. And hopefully you're the one that I did it for. You are pleased too.